Hello and welcome to episode 068 of the Bit Beacon broadcast. It is January 13th, 2024, and I'm going to jump straight into the usual stuff. This week I've got one new game that arrived. It's not really a new game, it's an older game from maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I think. And it is Superlative Night Dreams Cotton Fantasy. And no, this is not an 1800s plantation simulator. This is a shoot 'em up, or as it's kind of more known as a subgenre of a shoot 'em up, it's known as a cute 'em up. And that's because it's got this cute kind of old school 1990s anime aesthetic going on. And a shoot 'em up is a game, maybe you remember playing those like airplane games in the arcade, 1942, where you're like a bomber and you're kind of going on this like top down sort of thing and other airplanes are flying at you and things like that and you got to shoot them. It's kind of like that, except this one's side scrolling from left to right as opposed to like a top to down, moving forward kind of game. I've never played any of the games in this series, but they kind of caught my attention a few years ago when this publisher, in-game, started porting or localizing the console ports of the older games, the remakes, as well as the new games. And this is actually the newest game in the Cotton series, which goes back to, I think, the early to mid-90s. And there's apparently a sequel to this game on the way. And this was super dirt cheap on Amazon. A deal came up, it was like $11, and I couldn't say no to adding it to my collection. That's a Cotton Fantasy. Okay, so last week I told you guys I had finished the main story of Dragon Quest III HD 2D, and this week I had finished up all the post-game content, got myself the Platinum Trophy, and so I just kind of wanted to share some scattered thoughts about the experience overall. And I took some notes so I can be a little more coherent when I'm recalling what I'm talking about. And I apologize if you guys hear background noise. I really got to record the episode today, and for whatever reason, there's a guy blowing leaves, there is the trash guys, and they're backing up their trucks, and they're beeping, and so I'm sorry if you're hearing all that in the background. Okay. So for Dragon Quest III HD2D, I just want to say I love the authenticity of the game. For all intents and purposes, it is just as puzzling, challenging, and open as the original game was. Sure, it's got a fresh coat of paint, but it's still that same game with some new flourishes. These new additions take the form in a small but welcome amount of new backstory, kind of cutscenes, and some other touching moments. Some scenes that were like maybe just like two characters looking at each other. Well, now there's a bit of emotion and weight added to it with the voice acting and the music that just brings kind of a new layer of what do I want to call it? Just like emotional weight to the whole experience, because you are this character who's trying to save the world, and it is a big deal. And like the original game, it's very kind of passive. This is a game that was originally made in the late 80s, so, in terms of story presentation and what they could convey through the original Nintendo, it was pretty minimal. So this gave them a chance to really take that original concept, and the original creator of Dragon Quest, Yuji Horii, was involved with all of the new content added to this game, basically making it the definitive version of that game. So, in addition to the voice acting, which I absolutely loved, so much that, I'm a really big fan of the voice direction of the Dragon Quest games, especially in more recent years, like the last decade. They've gone for this whole, I guess not really the last decade, they've been doing it longer than that, but I really love the different kinds of English accents that they use. So they basically, I believe these games are localized in Europe, and they add in Irish accents, Welsh accents, and all parts of like the British Isles, and it really kind of gives like a distinction to like different towns and things and characters that you meet, like that you can tell they're from a different place. And there's a really cool thing that happens in this game that's tied to Dragon Quest XI, which came out back in like, I don't know, 2018 or 2017. And with that game, there is a secret cutscene that plays at the ending, and I won't, have any spoilers here, but there's a character in that cutscene who is also at the beginning of Dragon Quest III due to some story shenanigans where they tied those games together somewhat. And it's really cool. They actually got the original voice actors back from that secret ending cutscene to come back and record a whole bunch of dialogue for this game. So I thought that was a really cool touch. That's something they could have easily just glossed over, found a different voice actress. But I appreciate that they went out, found her again. Or maybe that was the plan all along. I have no idea. To bring her back, but I just thought that was a really cool touch. I immediately, when I realized that kind of thought, I was like, oh my gosh, is that the same voice actress? I had to go and look up the secret scene from Dragon Quest XI, and sure enough, there are people in the comments like, wow, I can't believe it, they brought her back. Anyways, that is a tangent, if I ever heard one. So in addition to like the new story stuff that they added and the voice acting, there's also a new playable vocation. Think of like a class for your character, not the main character, one of your sub characters, and this is the Monster Wrangler. So it's somewhat tied to another new feature of the game, which is friendly recruitable monsters that you can do battle with in the monster arenas found in certain towns. The Monster Wrangler's abilities and their strength is tied directly to how many of these recruitable monsters you've found in the game's world, town, and dungeons. I found the Monster Wrangler to be one of the best vocations near the end of the game, and I am glad I had one of my original party members choose that as their initial vocation. Which brings up an interesting point to make. Your party outside of the main character is not motivated by the game's story. They are all player created, and sure, you can make up some stories for them in your head, but don't expect them to get involved in the story. You never meet their families, go to their homes, and find out about what motivates them. But that's kind of the trade-off for having like a game that's more you create your party rather than we have these predefined characters. I kind of personally prefer the well-written, predefined characters. I like interacting with them. There's really no like party interaction in that sense in this game. Again, this is a game made in the late 80s, so it's a bit different. Also, this game has incredible music. Orchestrated versions of the original game's music are present in this remake, and they are absolutely pleasing to listen to, but I do wish there were a few more tracks to spice up some of the repetition, especially like the battle theme. It's literally the same battle theme from minute 10 of the game all the way to hour 70, which is about how long it took me to beat the game. While the game is challenging in places, I do feel like the larger part of the challenge is not knowing what you're doing, where to be next, and feeling a bit lost. The game suffers from a severe lack of bosses in the first half of the game, so it fails to present much in the way of that kind of challenge, which means you are never really tested in terms of forming good party strategy and synergy with your team until much later. Now, when the challenge picks up, it really does come at you hard. Your characters need synergy with each other, and you will need a strategy. I've got no shame in admitting that I had to consult a guide a few times for some of these boss fights, and the late game dungeons, as well as a guide to locate the game's many collectibles, such as the mini medals and the monsters scattered around the world. It's a decidedly old school game, which calls for using walkthroughs and guides, and I absolutely love that aspect of it. There's something cozy about sitting down, or laying down, maybe even in your bed, with your game and a guide. Unfortunately, they don't really make the actual physical strategy guides too much anymore, but I was able to use a few different online resources where people had kind of started working on some guides in order to get through some certain aspects of the game. So, the PlayStation Portal, I think I played 75% of my time with this game. I played on the PlayStation Portal, sitting in my bedroom, on my bed, and I don't know, there's something just really cozy about this game. I absolutely loved it. So if you're in the mood for an old school turn-based game, I can't recommend the game more highly. There are issues with the pacing, especially early on in terms of the challenge, But it is a fantastic package. The presentation is top notch. The music is incredible. And there are honestly some really touching moments in the game as well. Even for how minimal the story really is, there's some great stuff in there. And I'm so glad to finally check Dragon Quest III off my bucket list of games that I've just been meaning to get around to. Ever since I got the original game, or the Game Boy Color version back when I was in junior high, this is basically, since that day, I've finally kind of crossed that title off my list. So pretty cool to get there finally. Okay, so there's still no news about that event at Insomniac Games headquarters in Burbank. Insomniac Games, the creators of Ratchet & Clank, Spyro the Dragon, and the recent Spider-Man game series. So, and I fear that with these wildfires that we have now in Southern California, in the Santa Monica and San Gabriel Mountains, the event is likely to be postponed or even canceled. It would be completely understandable, but a bummer nonetheless. Still, no official word from Insomniac yet, but I'm sure they're kind of weighing their options and how they want to proceed. So with that out of the way, it's time to jump into the news, and I've got a couple stories for you, as I usually do. Oh wait, I'm jumping the gun. We've got to open a booster pack. All right. So I'm realizing that I've sort of exhausted as much content as I can get out of these booster packs for now. So this might be the last one we open until they add a significantly new size set, because oh my god, it's just duplicate after duplicate lately. All right, so again, I'm targeting the Charizard card because there's a few, the packs I should say, not the card. I've already got the Charizard cards. Alright, and it's a bunch of commons. Mankey, Rattata, Ponyta, Whimsicott. Okay, we are moving on. Well, that was fast. So yeah, I think I'm going to take a break from doing the pack openings here on the pod until we got another new booster set to open. Alright, so our first story goes back to a story we reported on last year, and that is the exit of the majority of the staff at Annapurna Games. So Annapurna Games is the publisher of many independent game projects that has just started dabbling in their own in-house game development last year. While Annapurna has said that they're committed to rebuilding after most of their staff left, we still haven't heard from just what all those staff have gotten up to, beyond knowing that they were planning to start a new, similar venture on their own. Now, a few months later, we finally have seen them make their first move, and it's a pretty big one. The still unannounced new venture, meaning we don't know what they're calling their company, we know has come to acquire games and properties from Take-Two, Take-Two being the publisher of big stuff like all those 2K sports games and Grand Theft Auto. They purchased their Private Division label, which had acquired multiple independent game teams over the last several years. The two seem like a good match. Annapurna is looking for smaller teams to help launch their games and market them. This is a little different though, because Annapurna is now going to own, the former Annapurna publishing team is now going to own these studios. So that's kind of a different way to do things than they have been used to doing. Kind of a big step for them, I would say. So this is probably welcome news to a lot of those development teams. As we know, Take-Two had been trying to, they laid off some of these studios, closed them entirely, and then in November, that's when they sold off the remaining studios. So we didn't know who the buyer was, but now we know the buyer was these former Annapurna Games publishing people. It's not all good news, though. Since the former Annapurna staffers will be taking over the operations side of things, it does mean that close to 20 Private Division staffers will be let go. But I mean, those people were all going to lose their job if those Annapurna staffers didn't step in and take over. So, I mean, it's kind of, there's a trade-off, I guess. Ultimately, it's going to mean more people with jobs than the other option. So all of this information comes from investigating and reporting by Bloomberg's Jason Schreier, who has a great track record, but none of this is still officially confirmed by the involved parties, although I suspected months ago that they would have announced themselves to the world by now, but they've still yet to do so. But I can't imagine it's going to be too much longer before we hear from them. DFC Intelligence is a market research firm that has a focus on the games industry. They describe their services as insightful market analysis and forecasting without the hype, overpromising, and spin. 2 weeks ago, DFC Intelligence released their annual market report, which costs $5,000 to buy and includes a 1-hour phone call with one of their analysts to go over the data with you. How generous. Video Game Chronicle got their hands on the report and shared a few of the details publicly. First, DFC believes that the industry is on the mend. The last 2 years have been hard on the games industry, with slowing sales and company-wide shutdowns and layoffs. They believe that this is the beginning of things getting better. CEO of DFC, David Cole, said this in the report. Over the past 3 decades, the video game industry has grown more than 20%. Or 20 times, and after 2 years of slumping hardware and software sales, it's poised to resume growing at a healthy rate through the end of the decade. While 2025 will mark the beginning of that upward trajectory, some huge questions remain, including who will lose the next-gen console war and who will win the game software distribution battle. And with the large publishers focused on live services and evergreen franchises, opportunities for smaller studios will be plentiful. So that's a pretty optimistic take on things, and I hope he is right about the opportunity for smaller studios to strike gold while large publishers continue to chase these live service trends. The other noteworthy tidbit from the report is that DFC believes that in the next console generation, meaning PlayStation 6 and Xbox Next and the Nintendo Switch successor, that there are only going to be 2 manufacturers making hardware, or 2 of them are going to survive that and move beyond that generation, which means DFC is effectively saying that between Nintendo, PlayStation, and Xbox, DFC believes that Nintendo will absolutely continue. But they're saying PlayStation 6, or Xbox Next, let's just call it that, will be battling for their life, while the other likely exits after the conclusion of that generation. This is kind of a bold prediction here. Obviously, they can't know that. But we do know that during the current console cycle that's happening right now, Xbox is largely floundering in the hardware sales chart compared to PlayStation 5, and that domination by Sony is likely to continue unless Xbox does something pretty radical. We know that Microsoft is trying to change the perception of what is an Xbox with their current marketing campaign. Is this the beginning of a bold new strategy to try and change the tides? I do think so. The new marketing feels empty right now, but by the end of this year, we have some hints that there might be some things that sort of make more sense. There have been some rumors that Xbox plans to launch their next-gen console much earlier than anticipated, with a fall 2026 release. That's kind of crazy. That means it'll be one of the shortest Xbox cycles in a long time. We've seen this trend of console generations becoming longer and longer and longer. So if Xbox is ready to just abandon their current consoles, the Xbox Series X and the Xbox Series S, that's pretty crazy. So we have seen Nintendo do something like this before by abandoning their Wii U years earlier than they had probably anticipated, and it did work out pretty incredibly for them with over 150 million Nintendo Switch consoles sold. If Xbox launches a new console next year, that would likely put them 1 to 2 years ahead of when Sony would be launching PlayStation 6, which would give them kind of a big head start. We have seen with the Xbox 360, that did launch, 2 years before the Wii and the PlayStation 3, which is pretty crazy. And the Xbox 360 was a huge success. Obviously, it didn't do the numbers that the Nintendo Wii did, but it did pull way ahead of PlayStation 3. PlayStation 3 was largely a big mess for its first several years. It did finally start to catch on a little bit later. So Microsoft probably sees this as their last-ditch attempt to change the course of gaming history. They are now the largest publisher of games in the world after owning Activision Blizzard now. But can they stay in the hardware game? That's the question they are trying to figure out, and nobody knows the answer to it. End transmission.